second video about seventh chords, and in this video we're going to be identifying the types of seventh chord that are most commonly used in the type of music that we're studying. Prior to this, we worked out how to name seventh chords, and we observed that it is a combination of the triad at the bottom of the seventh chord and then the interval of a seventh contained between the root and the seventh in the chord, because seventh chords are triads with an additional note added at the top, and this creates a triad and an interval of a seventh. And we observed that, and we identified different ways of naming triadic style seventh chords, being able to identify them by a combination of the name of the triad and the name of the seventh. That's great, we got that understood. Hopefully we know what we're doing with that. What we now need to do is to start looking at the specific types of seventh chord that we will encounter most often, because these are the ones you really need to know. You really need to know how they work, how they operate, kind of get your mind around being comfortable with them so that you can identify them clearly and you can use them and employ them in your own creative work, in composition and in studying and analyzing music. So here they are. These are the 5 that you will most commonly encounter. I'm just going to talk you through them, although hopefully you can see them and you can identify what's going on. You can understand what's going on just by looking at them. I'll make a few marks though, just so we understand. So here we have the first one, major, major seventh. Notice this is a major triad and a major seventh interval. It gives us a major, major seventh chord. That's the name we use for it. It has a very unique, kind of almost jazzy sound, and it's not super common, but it is certainly an available sound world for us. The second one is the major minor 7. This in this case has a major triad and a minor 7. This is very common. You will encounter this type of major minor 7 chord probably more than any of the others. The major minor 7th chord is very common, and when we start looking at chord sequences and how to build these chords inside of keys, inside of a particular being in a key, where do you find major minor 7ths, where do you find major major 7ths, as we start looking at those type of parts of the way music is put together, you'll realize that this is a very common type of 7th chord, and there are certainly some good reasons for that. So we'll get to that, just bear it in mind. The next one is minor, minor. And the minor, minor is probably the second most common 7th chord that you would encounter. It would be a right, depending on how much music you're looking at, if you're just looking at rock and pop music, or if you're also looking at classical music, and depending on how far back you're going into classical music, you could argue that this is the second most popular one, or you could argue that later on, this one we're going to look at in a moment, that that's the second most popular one. My point being, this is a fairly well used, a fairly commonly encountered type of 7th chord. The next one is the diminished minor 7. That is a diminished triad and a minor 7th. And the diminished minor 7th has a specific name. Both these last ones have alternate names. This one is called the half diminished. And the next one we'll see in a moment. We'll just jump right onto it. This is where you have a diminished triad and a diminished 7th. You might want to take a moment just to pause the video to find a piece of music paper to write C to B double flat out and to do a quick interval analysis. See if you can figure out what is that. You should find out that that is a diminished 7th. You know, use the charts, count the number of half steps, all of that stuff. So you kind of get in your head why that is, why I'm giving it the label I am. This is a diminished triad, C, E flat, G flat. C to B double flat is a diminished 7th. So you have a diminished triad, a diminished 7th. It's a diminished 7th. All right, remember, the name is a combination of the name for the triad and the name for the 7th interval. The triad is diminished, the 7th interval is diminished. It's a diminished, diminished. That's tricky to say, and it's over time it has become known as the fully diminished. It has a very unique sound that we'll look at in class, and as such it was used a great deal in certain time periods. It's not used as much in rock and pop style, which is why I was debating whether or not this chord or this chord is, this is very common, whether the minor chord or the fully diminished chord was the second most common chord. It kind of depends what type of music you're looking at. That said, certainly you should know about all of these seventh chords. They are the seventh chords that you are most likely to encounter. Of these seventh chords, you will certainly encounter the major minor most, and you'll certainly come across the fully diminished and the minor 7 as well, which is not to say the others couldn't be employed in certain times and at certain points in a particular composition. And we'll certainly look at some examples of that and see how we can incorporate them and use them in our own work. So those are the types of seventh chords. You should get to know them. You should be familiar with how they are named, and you should also just be familiar specifically with these 5 chords and knowing how to identify them, and that they are used more or less commonly within the types of music we're going to be looking at.